Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us for today's session titled Thinking Outside the Box, Planning and Preparing for Fall Sports Competition in the Spring. My name is Katie Newman, and I'm proud to serve on the NACDA team here in Cleveland, Ohio. Our world of college athletics has certainly been turned upside down in recent months. What I'm sure many of us thought may be a short-lived encounter has lingered and has caused many of us to rethink our usual ways of operating. With recent announcements of the cancellation and postponement of fall sports competition, conferences and departments across the country at all divisions are now focused on how they might shift fall seasons to the spring semester. Today, we're excited to have an esteemed panel of leaders in our industry discuss their experience and insights as they help to lead their departments and conferences through these uncharted waters. Newly appointed NACDA Executive Committee member Mike Snyder, Director of Athletics at Illinois College, will help to moderate our conversation today with Dr. Bob Helmer, President of Baldwin Wallace University and President of the Ohio Athletic Conference President's Council, Dr. Charles McClelland, Commissioner of the Southwestern Athletic Conference, and David Sayler, Director of Athletics at Miami University and Chair of the Mid-American Conference Council of Athletics Directors. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to join us today to provide perspective to our membership on the various processes, conversations, and decisions that you have been involved with to this point. Before we begin, I would like to remind our attendees joining us on Zoom that you can ask questions throughout the session using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will respond to as many questions as possible towards the end of today's discussion. Thank you again for joining us today. And Mike, the floor is yours to kick off today's session.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate it. And thanks to the NACDA staff for putting this together, as well as the other many wonderful educational sessions I've been able to put forward this summer and early fall. I'd also like to thank David Sayler and Charles McClelland and Bob Helmer for being with us here today. Everyone has a unique background and experiences in the work that's happened this fall and as we're planning to move forward into the springtime. So as we get ready to dive into the topic here and start thinking about what the plans are in place and what we're thinking about to do things for the springtime, I think it's best to maybe start at the beginning and maybe come back a little bit to the decisions that were happening at the end of the summer and early fall, and ask maybe some questions here from the panelists on, if you could please outline maybe a little bit about how your process looked during this time of decision making. What are some things that you were discussing? Who are the stakeholders you were involved in your process? Just a little bit of a synopsis of the work that went into your areas to maybe help frame out the conversation. So, Bob, why don't you go ahead and start it off for us, if you could, please.
Sure, Mike. So when I think of the process, I really think of it in two phases. Early summer, the OAC, the 10 OAC schools, we were really focused on trying to think, how could we have fall sports as safely as possible? And so there were constant meetings with ADs and ADs with coaches, presidents with ADs going back and forth, and it came down to, what today doesn't seem like bold steps, but at the time, let's not have non-conference play this fall. So instead of 10 games, we're only going to play 9. Let's limit travel. So we're not going to have overnight travel. Let's limit roster sizes. So, it was a discussion about how to mitigate the risk for fall sports as much as possible. But then, of course, as late June and early July came, and the pandemic was starting to surge, then the conversation shifted completely away from that and became more of, are fall sports safe at all? The OAC, the 10 team physicians, 2 of them are employees of the Cleveland Clinic. One of them heads up the sports medicine practice at the Cleveland Clinic. So we benefited greatly from the medical expertise of our team docs. And it was, I think, like the second and a half week in July, where I received on behalf of the 10 team physicians a letter stating the reasons why fall sports should not move forward at all. And it really, it was the health of the student athletes, and it was also the team physicians wanting to give the 10 schools the greatest opportunity to have a successful academic fall semester, in person or hybrid. So the 10 presidents, we came together July 20 something, and on July 24th, we publicly announced that the OAC was suspending all fall sports. So it was really two phases: one, trying to mitigate the risk, and second, simply saying fall sports couldn't proceed. And then the rest of our time from then on, we'll probably get to this later, moving from fall to spring.
Thank you. Charles, maybe your perspectives from your area as well too, please.
Yes, and we went through the process as Bob explained, but our process actually started sometime in April. And ultimately what we looked at, we have 10-member institutions. We're predominantly in the Southwest, the Deep South, and the Southeastern part of the United States. So when the pandemic hit, and later on in the spring semester and definitely in the summer months, we were in the middle of being hot spots in all of our states. So when we started looking in the month of April, we basically planned out what our fall would look like. What would it look like if we started at the time that we were supposed to start during September Labor Day weekend? And then we went out. What if we don't start the second weekend, third weekend, fourth weekend? And we planned all the way out, and we had a drop dead date. We said if we could not get our fall season in by October 17th, then we would look to shift to the spring. Again, health and safety of our student athletes and all constituents involved was our #1 priority. We are an FCS league. We don't participate with an automatic qualifier in the FCS playoffs. We're actually one of 2 leagues that will participate in what we call the Celebration Bowl, which is an end of the year bowl. So we're actually a part of the bowl season. And we are the only FCS conference that has a championship game. So our philosophy and model was a little bit different than even the other FCS schools. We kind of model somewhat from an FBS process. Also, we've led FCS attendance 42 of the last 43 years. Our biggest attended on average was Jackson State, a little over 33,000 fans a game. We own some of the largest, what we call football classics in the nation. Bayou Classic, well over 65,000, State Fair Classic, 50,000, Magic City Classic, over 65,000. And then we have some interleague matchups that are averaging 45, 50,000. So fan participation, our bands are very popular, tailgating is very popular. So when we looked as a part of that overall plan from a health and safety, we have 3 sources of revenues. That's game guarantees, that's institutional support, and that's what we get from gate. We knew that game guarantees were going to be out somewhere around that April-May timeframe, as Bob suggested, when we started to program what can we do, shorten the season, conference-only games, things of that nature. And ultimately, what we said was, if we could not give our student athletes a full and robust opportunity to play, and our fans a full and robust opportunity to engage, then spring was going to be a better option for us. Our drop dead date was October 17th. So if you start counting back when we made our decision, it started with October 17th being the last possible weekend that we could play. And then we did our calendar count back. And ultimately, we made our decision mid-July because there was a 2-week time frame in there where that was going to be the drop dead date. That first week in August was going to be that date for us if you count it forward to October 17th, for the time that we were going to get our student athletes in, have that acclimatization period when we're going to get everything together. So at that point, our presidents and chancellors decided we're not going to be able to go forward safely. We're not going to be able to play by the 17th of October. So our only option at that point was to move to the spring.
Thank you. I mean, that's some early planning, but as we all know, it takes a lot of work to get to these decisions. So it makes a lot of sense. David, from your perspectives on campus and then your involvement with the Mid-American Conference, what do you have to add to this discussion process?
Well, I think it's somewhat similar. We started really looking at the impacts of the virus soon after everything was canceled in the spring. And the reason we started talking about it as a league is we're heavily funded through student fee and institutional support dollars. And so we rely on our institutions to be vibrant and open and functioning at full capacity. And we all were worried that for the next 3-4 years, if you miss a class at the beginning, it sometimes stays with you for multiple years. And so we were starting to think about what type of cost saving measures we could implement right away. And we actually formed a committee that I chaired, and we proposed a lot of things that were going to be different this fall in terms of how the MAC operated. Travel roster is smaller, number of conference games maybe increased since we're more of a bus league, things of that nature. So we already started thinking about virus related issues through that process, but our intention all summer was to play this fall. We wanted to wait as long as possible to pull the plug if that was going to be the case. I would say it was a combination of like has been mentioned, we had doctors on a call, and what really swung it for us was when the ADs, we asked the doctors, would you let your children play contact sports this fall? And all of them said no. That was a kind of a defining moment for us. And I'd say the critical day go, no go decision for us was really when contact was going to start in practice, assuming we were going to play football on September 12th, like Charles said, go backwards from there. And when was contact going to start? And shortly before that, we made the decision to move forward as a league. We would have liked some more participation from other Division I conferences and some more involvement as a collective group. I know our commissioner, John Steinbrecher, tried very hard to make that happen. Unfortunately, there's just too many different moving parts and pieces. And even within our conference, I got to tell you, as the chair of the ADs, I spent all month of July and August talking to other ADs because Michigan's very different than Illinois, and Illinois is very different than Ohio in terms of how we're dealing with this. And we also have Indiana and New York to play with. So just trying to make sure I understood where every AD was with their county health commissioners in their state as well.
No doubt, a lot of coordination, and that's within a lot of our conferences spread out across such a large landscape, and different health officials in different regional areas have different opinions, and so it certainly makes these conversations a little more challenging. So, moving forward then out of this, Charles, you mentioned offering a full and robust offering for the fans and for the student athletes, and it got my brain kind of moving a little bit to the current. And now that this decision has been made to move, what does it currently look like for your schools and your conferences and maybe on campus? How are the student athletes currently getting some full and robust opportunities, whether it is on the playing fields or if there's additional programming opportunities, or just thinking along those lines to maybe fill what might be seen as a void and an opportunity with the competition leaving this fall?
Yeah, and that was part of the decision as to why we announced our spring so early, and also part of the decision why we put our schedule out for spring. We've already announced our spring schedule. We're going to have 6 conference games with 1 opportunity for non-conference games. There are 2 bye weeks that are built into that schedule to allow us to host our basketball tournament. And then we're still going to have our championship game. And ultimately, what we wanted to do was give them a sense of there will be a season, there will be an off season, and you need to remain focused, and you need to continue to do all of the things that you're supposed to do to get ready for that season. Again, our television dollars are not as significant as it is in a group of 5 or even Power 5. So our television revenue did not necessarily drive our decision. It really came down to health and safety and our ability to be able to deliver that robust season. When you look at it, if and when, and obviously COVID-19 is going to determine ultimately what we do, we're very confident that we'll move forward and there will be a reduction in the numbers as well as a vaccination. And that's the reason why we were so considerate in making sure that we have the time in between where we are now and when we're going to start. Our student athletes it's going to be a year and a half before they've even had the opportunity to put on pads and have that full level of contact, right? So we needed them to not only get physically ready, but mentally ready. And we also have a varying amount of our student athletes that come from environments that COVID-19 is only one area in which they have to be concerned about. There are various other entities. A lot of our student athletes will call their member institutions home, right? So from a eating standpoint, from a health and safety standpoint, even from a mental stability standpoint, our member institutions are critical to our student athletes. We wanted them to be able to come back on campus, whether it was on campus, in person, on campus, online, or a hybrid of both. We wanted them to be able to go to the trainers, be able to go to the doctors, get all of those things, because again, this has significantly affected us, not just from a COVID-19 standpoint, but from a mental standpoint. All that's going on in America now, even with the social injustice and that movement, our member institutions are the best foundation for our student athletes to get ready to play football in the spring. So when we talked about making sure that we have those programs available, it just wasn't getting on the field. It was getting them back to the sense of normalcy, getting them back mentally ready, physically ready. So when we touch the field in the last week in February, they will be ready and we will be able to put a great product, but also from an academic and a mental standpoint, we could mesh those three entities together.
Absolutely. Bob, from your standpoint, from a small private school perspective here, what can you offer on what's going on your campuses? I mean, we know that oftentimes for small schools, enrollment is tied directly to athletics and some enrollment or some roster sizes and whatnot. With this change in the fall, at least I know on our campus, there was a lot of discussion about, if we don't play, are we going to lose enrollment, and what does that do? So maybe you could shine a little bit of light on how that's looking on your campus and what you're doing there to hopefully mitigate those risks.
Yeah, there's no doubt that for D3 schools, the student athletes and enrollment, it's an important factor. I'm just going to pick up on what Charles said. For us here at Baldwin Wallace, being able to engage our student athletes in a meaningful way this fall has done an enormous amount for keeping the student athletes here on campus. We really did not see any drop off from our student athletes. Coaches were instrumental in that. I had a Zoom call with coaches. Coaches had a Zoom call with student athletes. I had a Zoom call with incoming student athletes and their families. And as Charles said, the OAC, we announced our spring schedule probably 2 weeks ago now. And once it came out that football was going to start March 12th, a Friday night, right? Not the usual Saturday. I think we're calling it like Friday night under the lights. Once that schedule came out, you could just see student athletes settle in and say, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to be here this fall. This fall is now the non-traditional season. And the coaches are engaging the student athletes and doing it in creative ways. Even the thought of leadership development with student athletes. Maybe in the past that might have happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Maybe this semester it's going to happen on a Friday night or a Saturday night to keep student athletes on campus, to keep student athletes focused. We have an opportunity to engage our student athletes in new ways. And something, I was going to say something as simple as putting out your spring schedule, but I know for the OAC that was not a simple thing to do. But as soon as it got sent out, everybody just settled down and said, okay, we're going to do this. So it can be good.
Absolutely. David, what about perspectives from your end?
It's just, I think part of the uncertainty for the kids is the hardest part. And we did have some kids here in the summer, doing voluntary work stuff and workouts, and they seem locked in and focused. I think the challenge for us a little bit was a lot of the kids on campus are allowed to move off campus starting mid-August here at Miami. And even though we're remote, a lot of the on-campus kids have moved in. And so they're in town. And once the student athletes lost the participation opportunity for the fall, there has been some concern and extra efforts on our side to try to make sure that we engage them and keep them motivated and keep them involved. They're real creatures of habit. That's one of the things about Division I athletes that's unique, and frankly, all divisions. The kids are committed to what they do, and they spend a lot of time and effort to prepare. What's been interesting for us to observe is that kids that come from pretty structured environments and pretty squared up situations, they've actually struggled the most because the disruption has just been something very unusual to them. It's something that they're just not used to. Whereas we have other kids from some tougher situations at home or whatnot, and those kids have actually been dealing with adversity their whole life, and they've had multiple things they've had to juggle at one time to get by and figure out how to make it work, and those kids have really thrived in this situation. So I feel like a lot of the kids have learned a lot from each other. In addition to all the social justice things that have been going on and we've been engaging them with, we've just really been trying to take the opportunity to allow them to learn from each other and dialogue with each other and create a lot of safe spaces for them to talk and just try to get through this together. Because that's the biggest message I have, is that we are going to get through this. There is another side to this. And sometimes, you get so wrapped up in the crisis of it and the challenge of it, and the kids can't see past what they're dealing with right now. And so we've just tried to reassure them that this is coming. We're going to get through this and come out on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in these sort of circumstances, communication and trust is incredibly important. And if we're going to get through this all together, like we know we will, then we just have to make sure we're communicating effectively. And hopefully we've built the trust with our student athletes and coaches and other stakeholders along the way. So shifting gears a little bit. So, the main topic of this discussion is the planning and implementation, though, of what we're doing in the spring. And so I'd like to maybe move it over to that aspect a little bit. And Bob and Charles, I think both of you said that you've released schedules for the spring and you've kind of got some things put out there already. So, maybe Bob, if you want to start us off there with that, and maybe talk a little bit about your process with that, and where was your starting point? What were some things you were considering? Whether it was facilities or staffing levels, weather to think about. Some people may not have certain facilities that allow them to play games outside early, whatever that might be. Maybe if you could roll through some of that on the discussion side with the Ohio Athletic Conference.
Yeah, that was a great list of 3, Mike. Once we got past the initial reaction that it wasn't possible to move fall sports to spring, when it first got suggested, there were lots of people saying, you can't. The president saying to the presidents, you can't do that. The facilities, the staffing. We're in Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland in spring doesn't start until after the students leave campus after graduation in Cleveland. So, those 3 factors really became important to us. So it was a matter of, as you said, the importance of communication, getting buy-in, not just from the fall sports coaches, but getting buy-in from everyone. So, if volleyball usually played on a Wednesday, well, it's going to have to move to Tuesday in the spring. And if football normally played on Saturdays, well, maybe lacrosse was scheduled so football is going to be Friday nights under the lights. So the facilities for sure, a challenge. But if everyone is willing to give and take a little bit, we were all able to work it out. Staffing is an issue. Athletic trainers. We have 24 varsity sports, and to play 24 varsity sports in one semester, I can tell you, Baldwin, Wallace, we're gonna have to hire another athletic trainer. We don't have the staffing to do that. But the commitment is there to our student athletes to make this as meaningful a year as possible. The weather is the weather. So the Athletic Hall of Fame game, when we bring back all the student athletes, the alumni, they like lining up on the 50-yard line on a beautiful October day, leaves changing, crisp blue sky. It's going to be different in March when there's a couple feet of snow and it's probably below 0. But everyone, I think what I've seen and what the OAC presidents have seen, everyone willing to say this isn't a normal year. And so let it go. Just let go of whatever obstacles there seem to be, And when you do that, we're able to offer our student athletes a pretty meaningful spring experience. Friday nights under the lights for our football team, starting March 12th.
Charles, what about your end?
Yeah, I concur with a lot of what Bob said, but weather in the South in March, April is going to be perfect, minus a tornado or two. We might have to duck and dodge a tornado. So weather is actually going to be to our advantage. Ultimately, what we did was we wanted to make sure that we took our fall football plan, moving it to spring, and try to implement it within the confines of what spring football would already look like. So everybody knows in Division I, you have 34 days to get 15 practices or ability for you to meet 15 times. And you kind of stretch that out through that 34-day period. So clearly we could not do our entire season. We were also concerned about ending football at a time to where the student athletes could recover and get ready for a full and robust fall season. And then the third part of that, again, kind of alluding to what Bob said, facilities and all of the other sports. So ultimately what we tried to do was overlay our spring football competitiveness games on top of what our spring football practice would look like if we had. So we decided to start our games the last weekend in February, which it's going to be 1 week within the basketball season. So that was another piece. We didn't necessarily want to stretch our resources where we had all of these football games and all of these basketball games going. So our basketball season and our football season will only overlap for 1 week. And then we go to our basketball tournament. So we've actually built in a bye week so all of our resources can stop football and concentrate on basketball. Once we get basketball out of the way, we will only have one team obviously participating in the NCAA tournament. Now all of those resources can start to focus on the other sports. We actually move our soccer season and our volleyball season to the spring as well. So we're looking at those calendars to where we can start soccer a little earlier, again, because we're in the South, it's not going to be quite as cold, and then volleyball a little later, where we can get soccer done before we get to football or right within a week of football. And then we'll overlay volleyball to where volleyball can start right before basketball ends, because as you know, in our league, we travel in pairs. So we'll play a Saturday night and a Monday night, and our basketball teams will have to practice on a Friday night and a Sunday night. Well, typically our volleyball games are Friday and Sunday. So what we're going to do is start our volleyball season with half of our teams will start in the final week, the week before the final week. So every basketball team that's playing away, those volleyball games will have a home game. And then that following week, we'll flip it. And then basketball will be done. And now we can have full and robust volleyball inside our arenas where our basketball courts are. So our plan was to get our season started simultaneously, but at points in times where they don't overlap with each other and our resources can fit. And the biggest piece about football was we wanted to make sure that we ended our football, which it ends April 17th, other than the two teams that will participate in the championship game. So we said mid-April, mid-May, mid-June, mid-July, mid-August is when our teams start to report. So that's 4 months before we'll have any other football contact. And with our game starting Labor Day weekend, 4.5 months between the last football game and the first football game. So we really wanted to take a look at, again, as Bob alluded to, the resources that we have on campus, our facilities, weather cooperates with us. We could literally start playing in January here in the South because the weather is so good. So we have some other advantages to our disposal that some of our other member conferences do not.
So David, I think you're kind of in a slightly different situation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're in that planning stage now. Is that correct?
We are, and our commissioner has set up working groups for each sport that consists of head coaches, administrators from the various sports that oversee that at the MAC level. And then we've also included student athletes on those working groups because we think it's important to hear their voice as they shape what spring might look like. And we also have to try to factor in the NCAA championships. We still hope that we'll participate in those and the AQs will stand. And so we have to try to mirror our schedule around. So we really have a matrix of things we're thinking about. We're letting the doctors be involved from a health and safety standpoint. They're going to guide us in our decision making. And so they're involved. Like Charles said, we're worried about the turnaround to the fall and giving kids enough time to recover. We also want to make the season as robust as possible. That's another guidepost for us. I know the NCAA gave each kid an extra year of eligibility if they want it. That would put a huge financial strain on all of us. And also our rosters would be pretty unmanageable and unwieldy for coaches. And what do you tell recruits? And so our goal is to make the spring season as robust as possible, with the plan that the kids would take that year of eligibility and continue moving through their career. Like I said, we want student athlete input, so that's important. We need to talk to the NCAA and understand what they're thinking in terms of their championships. And then, as Bob mentioned, just being open. I mean, I think one of the unique things watching the NBA and the NHL and their bubbles is that they've been playing games at all hours of the day. They're just running through the games. And I think, we might play some games Wednesday at 2:00 and Tuesday at 4:00 that we normally don't do. We normally play on the weekends. And so all of that openness and willingness to run events and make them all work together is really something that the league has stressed to all of our administrations.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder to the attendees, we do have a Q&A function. So if you've got a question and want to submit that, please feel free to do so. We'll try to address some either along the way, but we'll definitely have some time at the end to roll through a few of those as well. So coming back to the discussion a little bit, whether it was, when the discussion was happening for you, Bob and Charles, or while it is currently happening for you, David, were there any hurdles? Is anything there that popped up that you thought, man, how are we going to overcome this? This is something that we need to really think more about. Or has it been pretty smooth sailing and it's just really thinking differently? What have you found in those areas?
I'll jump in. One challenge we've encountered as our county health department, trying to get real clear answers and clear understanding of how things are going to work, through this process has been very challenging for us. And then I think just being able to message and get out critical messaging within your staff has been really important, because once things start hitting that, this is going to happen at the league level, this might happen at the NCAA level, this might happen at the quarantine level with kids that we need to isolate, the message can get away from you really quick, and your coaches start getting hit up by parents and media and all these other things. So how you message internally has really been probably the biggest challenge for us, especially when you're working remotely and trying to get everybody on the same page. We've done a lot of very quick called Zoom meetings amongst coaches to try to make sure that we're sharing the right information with them. We also have to be very concerned about FOIA here. We're a state institution, and I can tell you the media has been beating down our door trying to get anything related to COVID planning that they can. They want to know test results. They want to know numbers. It's been a pretty constant drumbeat. And so we have to be very careful what we do put in email and what we don't. And that just makes that messaging kind of the system you put in place to try to make sure you're messaging properly even more challenging.
I think I agree with David. The importance of communicating. The OAC, the athletic directors meet weekly. I joined that call as the chair of the President's Council. For us, the planning actually has gone fairly smoothly. Once everyone got their minds around that we were going to do this, we were actually going to have fall sports in spring. That was probably the biggest challenge. And then everybody stepped up, and the planning's gone pretty smoothly. The execution in the spring, I think all bets are off. But the planning's been great.
Yeah, I think from our league, there were two challenges that led to how we made our decision. One of them was testing and the availability and the cost of testing. As you know, the NCAA has put out the guidelines to restart. So when do you start practice? When do you test? What test is going to be the right test? The availability of that test, the turnaround time of that test. And a lot of that had to be taken into consideration as to when we start, who we play, and how we play, because that's going to be a significant cost factor for us. That was significant. And I think another piece for our planning, and part of the reason why we wanted to get out front, is that we have very robust classics. And for those that are listening, you may or may not know what a classic is. Within the historically Black college and university world, we've kind of developed this model where we'll take our games to a certain city, and that city will embrace that game, and we'll have all kind of functions, concerts, parades, and we'll call it a classic. As a matter of fact, the Southwestern Athletic Conference participates in 4 of the 5 largest classics. And again, I mentioned some Bayou Classic, which most people know about, which is in New Orleans Thanksgiving weekend. There are several million people that will go to New Orleans. They'll have somewhere between 60 and 70,000 people. It's almost like a bowl game, but we have those multiple weeks throughout our season. Well, we have to coordinate with the city. We have to coordinate with the stadium. A lot of those stadiums are multi-use stadiums. So for example, we have a big classic in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl. Week 1, we'll play, and then the following week, Texas and OU will play. So, there's a lot of coordination that we have to do with multiple cities, with multiple state governments, and also with the local and state health guidelines that we have to deal with, whether or not we're going to be able to travel there, what's the quarantine. So trying to figure all of that out was almost like trying to solve, Chinese arithmetic. We just could not do it. So ultimately what we had to do was put a plan together that was flexible enough for us to be able to change in the middle of the season and make adjustments, in real time. So I think that those were some unique challenges that we had to deal with, and our membership, embraced those. And I think have done a pretty good job of dealing with that and creating a plan in order for us to work around some of those issues.
So you had mentioned, Charles, a little bit about testing, and you mentioned NCAA, and I'm actually going to pull one of the questions out of the Q&A section here. Someone asked about the work that was done with the NCAA, and specifically kind of the relationships and communication that have come with the NCAA, and maybe just talk a little bit about how that partnership maybe was part of your work, and how it's maybe influenced what decisions you've made.
Sure, that's a great question, and I'll give a little perspective as I answer this question. There are 32 Division I conferences, so they're what we call a CCAA, the Collegiate Commissioners Association. And within that association, you have the Autonomy 5, you have the Group of 5, you have Division I, which are all non-playing football schools, and then you have the SCS. We have all started to meet as soon as this pandemic hit. Immediately after the pandemic hit, and we had to cancel the basketball championship, and the spring season was canceled, CCA started their calls. So the Autonomy 5 will meet on their own. The Group of 5 will meet on their own. Division I will meet on their own. FCS will meet on their own. Then we will all meet together. And then there was a hodgepodge of those meetings. So for example, the conferences within the Southeast, the Southeastern Conference, the OVC, the SWAC, the Southern Conference, the Atlantic Sun, the Sun Belt, we would meet. So there are at least 5 of these Zoom calls per week ever since April, and they're still going on. Twice a week, we have a full CCA call. The NCAA, they're on those calls twice a week, and they are individually on all of our calls, not every call, but if the FCS needs Dr. Brian Hayline to get medical advisement, President Mark Emmert, Kevin Lennon to get any information from legislative processes, what's going on with the COC, the Committee on Competition, what's going on with the D1 Council, what legislation is being proposed, what's going on. All of those calls pertain to specifically the NCAA giving us that information and giving us the processes. So as we started to make decisions, we were able to have real-time information within the NCAA. That does not mean that they had all of the answers. That doesn't mean that they, quote unquote, gave us all of the information that they had. But we have the ability to ask those questions and utilize that information to be able to make real-time decisions. So for example, when we made our schedule, we had no clue what the spring season schedule was going to look like, when the season started, when you could practice. But we had had enough conversations with the NCAA to know that there was going to be the greatest level of flexibility. So it gave us the ability to go out and make those schedules, knowing that we were going to be able to have that autonomy, and the NCAA was going to give us the leeway to be able to do so. I've even heard, the national debate about, do we need a czar for college football? Because everybody is kind of doing their own thing. That's a debate for another day. But the one thing that I do like about the process was that it has been a collaborative process. Although my model and my needs are vastly different than even within FCS, SWAC and MEAC, because we don't have an automatic qualifying status. Our needs are a little bit different just in the FCS structure, but because we meet and talk every week, we can hash out all of that information. So nothing has been done in a vacuum. No decisions have been made in a vacuum. There has been a great level of collaborative spirit among all of the conferences, and it has continued to be that way ever since we started to meet.
Thank you. And Bob, David, anything else to add, or is that pretty solid on your ends as well?
I'll just throw in, I think the political football between the NCAA and the Power Five and Group of Five too, frankly, has been a little frustrating to manage and watch, whether they're going to hold fall sport championships. And then they were asked not to make a decision on that. Everybody was wondering when the next meeting was. The lack of consistent scheduling model, that was a frustration for all of us trying to piece this together. And I guess I'll just suffice it to say that there's a Power Five and there's only 4 playoff spots. So if we really couldn't figure that out, I didn't know what hope there was we'd do any better with this.
All right. So we've got a few more questions popping in here, and I think I want to address a couple of these now that I think are maybe some relevant speak here. So David, I think maybe you were talking about as you're working through the dates and kind of trying to figure out when you're going to do your competitions in the spring. And Bob and Charles, you guys could certainly have already made these decisions. The question came through is, has the NCAA established new championship dates for the fall sports in the spring semester? What happens if those dates don't match your revised spring schedules?
We're purposely waiting on locking in our schedules until we know those dates a little bit more clearly. The one thing we've been, I think, has been indicated to us is that they're not going to be as large of tournament fields as they've been in the past, which means there's a lot of question about how many, if there's less teams, does that mean all the conferences AQs go, or are some AQs who, win the regular season not going to be invited to the NCAA tournament? Those are the issues we have. And what we're trying to think is, if we're not going to be included in the NCAA tournament, we should at least offer a conference tournament experience for those teams. So we're trying to balance all that out, but we're still waiting on those dates getting locked in.
Yeah, I think there's a meeting within the next 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. I can't remember the exact date to determine the field size. There's been a great level of conversation about the field size. Do we honor AQs? Do you have the ability to make whatever those adjustments? I think it's going to be fair to say that the field size will be adjusted downward. It's not going to be a full field size in all of the sports. The calendars have not come out yet, but again, from a commissioner's standpoint, we have been in communication with the NCAA. But again, all that I've seen, they have given the greatest level of flexibility. So we even had a FCS call today, and this proposal is working its way through the process. And again, it's the date for FCS football. And basically what they were trying to do was to give those conferences that flexibility. So you can kind of start when you want it to start, but we have a hard stop date, so it wouldn't extend too far for health and safety for fall sports. So I think when you start to look at the dates and when the NCAA is going to come out, I think you're going to see some flexibility at the beginning but more of a hard stop at the end to be able to get those championships in. So I don't foresee, and again, please don't quote me on this or take this to the bank. I don't foresee that there's going to be large scale issues with scheduling with those dates. I think there's going to be some flexibility that conferences are going to be able to obtain to be able to make it fit within what the NCAA is going to put out from a calendar standpoint.
Charles talked about flexibility the NCAA has given. I think for the Ohio Athletic Conference, we gave ourselves, we allow ourselves to have flexibility as well. So the setting of the spring schedule was our stake in the ground to say it's going to happen. But if we have to be flexible and ultimately tweak the date 1 week, one way, or if we have to change it, it won't be the first change to the schedule for this year. And we're just giving ourselves the flexibility. If that's what's needed, then that's what we'll do.
Absolutely. Flexibility is key, that's for sure. So one of the questions that came up that I think is interesting, and I can say personally, we're starting to have these discussions and trying to think through this in our department with some of our coaches is, can anybody on the panel here speak to overlapping sports such as cross country and track, and then indoor/beach volleyball? And what are the challenges that you're facing in making sure those student athletes in those sports get the opportunity to compete in those sports? It's going to be, as we know, cross country happens at one time, and then they a lot of times become part of that track team, and you might miss that opportunity for what a real cross country season looks like. So anybody who might have some insight on that, I think it would be interesting to hear where your thoughts were on those discussions.
Well, I'll jump in. Again, we've had some of those discussions within the commissioners group. And I think the cross-country discussion is probably the one that has garnered the most attention, seeing that if you move that sport to spring, you're already with indoor, and indoor goes to outdoor. What happens with cross-country? And again, in the last meeting that we had with the NCAA, Joni Comstock basically said that she was committed to having a cross-country championship, that she did not want to deny those student athletes the opportunity to participate in a championship. So again, don't know what those plans are, don't know how we fit it within the overall model. It is going to take some ingenuity. One thing that I learned, and I guess it's pretty, something that's already out there. I guess I just didn't research it. There are some member institutions, both at Division I, Division II, Division III, that have cross country but don't have indoor track or don't have outdoor track. So there is a proportion of the membership that has cross country only that will be looking for those opportunities. And I do think different conferences are going to have to make their own individual decisions as to if that sport's going to be counted or not. Typically, you have a cross-country runner that will run indoor, that will run outdoor. But what about that cross-country runner that's only running cross-country? Obviously, they have that year of eligibility given back. So some additional decisions are going to have to be made. And we talked briefly about, sand volleyball, but I think it kind of falls in that same category as cross-country.
I think it's a great example where it's so important we learn from each other. The OAC, we don't have this one figured out quite yet, but our commissioner spends so much time talking with other commissioners and just learning and hearing what others are doing. There's a lot. In the time of a pandemic, it's good to be part of a big group and get best practices from each other. So that's the lesson we've learned on this one.
All right, we've got about 10 more minutes left in our session here today. Just a reminder back to the folks that are with us. If you've got any additional questions that you'd like to submit, please use the Q&A function. Like I said, we've had a few that have come in. We've been addressing those as they've been coming through. If any more pop up, we'll certainly come back and address those as time permits. A question I just want to put out there, maybe just a general thought. So for each of you in your individual roles, you certainly have different positions and different responsibilities, and your eyes are on this for different reasons, and so I think maybe putting some words of wisdom out to your individual colleagues. So from a conference commissioner standpoint, from a presidential standpoint, from an athletics director standpoint, maybe if you could each take a moment to speak to your colleagues and say, you know, this is something that I think you should be aware of, and something that you've come across that maybe some words of advice for them as they're working through this in their areas.
I'll take a stab at it a little bit. I would just say to stay focused on the present. I know you have to look forward and you have to try to plan, but you have to be adaptable, right? And so not being too proud to say, we said this a little bit ago, but this is what we really need to do now. And the challenge with that, with the rub really is for me, is that we're talking to coaches all the time. And let's be honest, coaches like to be in control. They like to know what's happening and how they're going to prepare and how it's going to work. And just trying to convince everybody to just let that guard down a little bit and just let's have a broader discussion about where we need to go, and let's stick to our priorities. Our priorities are the health and safety of our kids. And I don't care what school X is doing. I don't care what school Y is doing. We're programmed to always worry about those things and talk about those things and try to create this totally level playing field. And it just doesn't exist right now with the different states and counties and the way the virus is in different places. All you can do is focus on where you are and what you can do right now, and try to start to think about what you want it to look like going forward, and just give up a little bit of the control and give up a little bit of the ownership of I got to do it this way. And that's really been the biggest piece of advice I've tried to give our coaches and our staff.
David, I think those are good words. Coaches, ADs, ownership of their team, ownership of the competition. I think on my campus and the OAC campuses, the presidents have been encouraging coaches and ADs, everyone, to take ownership not only of their team, but of the entire university. These are not days to be focused solely on wins and losses and one particular team. Nothing's in isolation this year. So, we've been encouraging our coaches, yes, you're the football coach, but you're the football coach of this university. And so the student athletes and the team, they're in the context of the whole place. And so what you do and how your student athletes act, while they're student athletes and off campus, it impacts everyone, and everyone impacts you. And so, kind of our message has been that for this year, we're all, not just athletics, the whole university is in this together. And we think that's an important message.
Yeah, and I would add, I think both have said it quite well. And I would just add support, support to the president, support to the administration, the boards. This thing has taken us all off guard. Stakes are high. We're having furloughs, we're having layoffs, we're having all type of financial issues. What's right for one university might not necessarily be right for the same, different university in the same conference. So let's just support each other and understand that we are in the middle of a pandemic, 100-year pandemic, and all bets are on the table. So just because it's right for this conference or this school and not necessarily right for the other, let's continue to support each other, because this is definitely uncharted territory, unprecedented times. We're going to get through it, but the only way that we're going to get through it is together as one NCAA. We're not going to be able to do it disjointed. So just supporting each other.
Those are some great words of wisdom. I think that those things are all very important. And, as we've said, these are all unprecedented times, and we're trying to work through this the best we can. And some of us have, such as you, have had the opportunity to go through this a little sooner than maybe some of us are still in the planning process. So I think these sort of encouragement and words are very helpful. We had another question that just popped in here, specific for you, Bob, in the Division III world. It just says, from a Division III standpoint, we have a lot of multi-sport athletes. How much did that factor into decisions that were being made regarding scheduling?
Yeah, it's a casualty of the scheduling. Multi-sport athletes, it's going to be tough this year, if not impossible in many cases. But as my colleagues have said, if the health and safety of the student athletes and the university campuses are at the heart of the decisions, it's a tough one, but we talked about it, but we had to put that one to the side as we focused on the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, at this point, I think that kind of wraps up our session as far as our questions are concerned. I think I'm going to hand the microphone back over to Katie Newman and to wrap things up for us. So, Katie.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Gentlemen, really appreciate all of the knowledge and insights you've had to share today on your experiences. Bob, I think you mentioned, it's so important that we continue to share with one another, share best practices and learn from one another. And that's what this is all about. So really appreciate you finding the time in what I'm sure is your very busy schedules to join us today. And to our participants that have joined us, our staff is here to serve and support you. I know these are challenging times, but if there's anything that we can do, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, to reach out to any of our staff members. And on behalf of our CEO, Bob Vecchione, and our team here in Cleveland, thank you for joining us here today. Continue to stay safe and healthy, and we'll look forward to seeing and talking to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.